Bonjour tout le monde. Bienvenue à cette discussion que j'ai le plaisir d'animer. Moi, c'est Ali Cheriva, je fais partie du comité de sélection et j'ai donc le grand plaisir d'accueillir Lesia Cordonets, qui est ici avec nous, pour une discussion autour de son film Pushing Boundaries, un film qui est en première mondiale, présenté dans la section nationale. C'est en 2014 que Lesia a commencé à suivre l'équipe paralympique ukrainienne et au même temps que l'équipe s'entraînait, la Russie a annexé la Crimée. Donc on va parler de tout ça avec Lesia et on va commencer par lui demander quel était le point de départ de ce film qui est très fort, qui a une portée politique très forte et un regard cinématographique singulier.
Was war der Ausgangspunkt für deinen Film, der doch eine starke Aussagekraft hat und auch einen ganz eigenständigen filmischen Zugang? Wie bist du dazu gekommen?
Also ich habe dieses Thema nicht ausgewählt. Man kann sagen, das Thema hat mich gefunden. Die Annexion vom Krim hat mich sehr erschüttert. Also ich komme aus der Ukraine und ich denke, das ist eine Erscheinung, die meine Generation auch für die Zukunft prägen wird. Wenn mir jemand gesagt hätte, ein Jahr davor, es wird einen Krieg geben in der Ukraine, hätte das nicht für möglich gehalten. Also es war ein Schock und das ist schon wie ein kollektives Trauma. Und wenn wir Filmemacher uns als Geschichtenerzähler bezeichnen, dann habe ich wie gespürt, ich muss dieses Thema nicht unerzählt bleiben lassen. Besonders habe ich gespürt, dass man hier in diesem Teil von Europa wie nicht zu Beginn dieser Ereignisse nicht alles verstanden hat, was passiert dort. Und das war wie Impuls, warum ich Projekt begonnen habe. So.
Ja, das war eigentlich nicht ein Thema, das ich gewählt habe, sondern das Thema hat mich gefunden. Denn c'est un sujet qui a, pardon, c'est un sujet que j'ai pas forcément choisi moi, mais c'est le sujet qui m'a trouvé moi. Donc l'annexion de la Crimée pour moi c'était un choc, c'était une consternation. Ma génération elle a été marquée pour le futur. Et si un an avant quelqu'un m'avait dit qu'il y aurait une guerre, je ne l'aurais jamais cru, donc c'était un grand choc, c'est un trauma collectif. Et si l'on dit que les cinéastes sont des narrateurs, donc pour moi c'est un sujet qui doit être raconté. Et surtout qu'ici, dans cette partie de l'Europe, j'ai senti que l'Europe, en quelque sorte, au début, ne comprenait pas vraiment ce qui se passait en Ukraine.
Merci. Lesia, est-ce que vous pouvez raconter tout de suite en fait, quels ont été les enjeux d'un tournage sur ces territoires de frontières qui sont bouleversés?
Ja, und wie sah das aus vor Ort, in einem Gebiet von Grenzen, die jeden Tag hin und her wechseln? Was waren die Herausforderungen bei den Dreharbeiten?
Also zu Beginn hat man auch sehr viel Ungewissheit einfach. Es gab viele Faktoren, die dazu führen könnten, dass der Film nicht sich ereignet. Also ich hatte zum Beispiel ein bisschen Sorgen gemacht, ob wir Zugänge kriegen können, sei es für Dreh auf der Krim oder in besetzten Territorien oder in der Nähe zur Front oder auch im Sportministerium oder auch sogar an der Paralympiade. Also es war wie, man müsste zuerst überall Zugang finden und das war wahrscheinlich eine der so ersten Aufgaben, die man bewältigen musste. Aber der Dreh selbst war ziemlich intensiv in dem Sinne, dass wir haben ja 5 Protagonisten und 2 Nebenprotagonisten. Und jeder Athlet müsste man wie an 3 Orten verfolgen. Also bei ihm zu Hause, am Trainingsort. Und dieses Trainingsort konnte wie 12 Stunden Zugfahrt weiter sein. Und dann im Ausland bei Wettbewerben. Und wenn man das bei allen 5 Protagonisten macht, das heißt, es gab viele logistische Herausforderungen. Wir sind, ich glaube, allein innerhalb der Ukraine 27.000 Kilometer gefahren. Und es gab Drehs auch in anderen 5 Ländern, wo die Wettbewerbe stattfanden. Und einfach, das war sehr wie intensive Drehs, sehr körperlich, sehr physisch. Und du als Dokumentarist, du bist ja auch sehr empfänglich für die Realität. Also man ist wie eine Antenne, die alle Vibrationen durch sich laufen lässt. Und ja, das war wie sehr... also der Dreh hat wie auf tiefe Abdrücke hinterlassen. Also, du sagst Stopp, wenn ich zu viel rede im Blog.
Tout d'abord, c'était vraiment une grande incertitude. Il y avait plein de facteurs qui faisaient que nous ne savions pas vraiment si le film il allait effectivement avoir lieu. Un souci, c'était certainement l'accès. C'était l'accès pour des tournages en Crimée, sur des territoires occupés, mais aussi en proximité de la frontière, au ministère du Sport, aussi aux Jeux paralympiques. Donc ça, c'était un peu la première mission, c'était vraiment de trouver ou de garantir cet accès. Mais après, le tournage, il était très intense. Parce que dans le film, nous suivons 5 protagonistes et plus, encore 2 personnages en plus. Et il fallait les suivre sur 3 endroits. Donc à la maison, à l'entraînement. Et l'entraînement, ça pouvait parfois être à 12 heures de train, de trajet, et finalement aussi lors des compétitions qui avaient lieu à l'étranger. Donc pour suivre ces 5 sur ces 3 endroits, c'était quand même une très grande logistique. Rien qu'en Ukraine, nous avons parcouru plus que 20 000 km pour le tournage. Et en plus, nous nous sommes rendus dans 5 pays pour suivre les concours. Donc c'était un tournage très physique. Et en tant que documentaliste, on est aussi très réceptif pour la réalité, pour tout ce qui se passe. Donc on ressent, en quelque sorte, on a des antennes, on ressent les vibrations. Donc c'est aussi un tournage qui m'a personnellement fortement marqué.
Et je voudrais vous demander, alors... j'ai beaucoup aimé comment vous avez incarné les corps voilà, comment vous avez raconté ces athlètes de manière chorale. On en suit donc plusieurs. Et on sait que pour des athlètes, ce n'est pas facile d'exprimer des opinions politiques. Parfois, ce n'est pas possible de le faire dans le cadre sportif. Et donc, est-ce que votre film, c'était aussi un espace d'expression, de liberté pour ces personnes?
Ja, mir hat es sehr gut gefallen, auch wie die Erzählung diesen Athleten den Raum gibt und sie verfolgt. Und man sieht ja auch, dass Sportler es nicht leicht haben, um eine politische Meinung zu äußern. War in gewisser Hinsicht dieser Film auch dazu da, um eben einen Freiraum zu schaffen, dass sie eben eine politische Meinung äußern können?
Also das stimmt, also es kommt ein paar Mal vor, Politik und Sport gehen getrennte Wege und das ist offizielle Haltung auch von Internationalen Paralympischen Komitee natürlich, dass man will nicht Politik und Sport zusammenmischen. Man will das erreichen, aber in der Wirklichkeit ist es nicht so. Ich wollte mit dem Film sicher die Stimme, den Athleten und auch dem Valery, dem Chef vom Paralympischen Komitee, ukrainischen Paralympischen Komitee geben. Aber auch aus dem Grund, als ich das Projekt begonnen habe ich den Eindruck gehabt, dass man redet sehr viel über die Ukraine, aber nicht mit Ukraine. Also in Medien, wo viele Experten eingeladen waren zu diesem Thema, wenn es die Sendung über das Thema Ukraine-Russland war. Und das war auch wie für mich auch ein Impuls, warum ich habe gedacht, okay, jetzt, der Film kann eine Perspektive von ukrainischen Protagonisten erzählen.
Oui, dans le film, plusieurs fois, c'est mentionné que le sport et la politique, ce sont deux mondes séparés. Et c'est aussi la position officielle du Comité international paralympique qui dit que ça doivent être deux choses séparées. Mais c'est quelque chose qu'ils essayent d'imposer comme ça, mais qu'en réalité n'est pas vraiment comme ça. Donc, en quelque sorte, oui, j'ai voulu donner la voix à Valérie, au chef du comité paralympique ukrainien et aux athlètes. Mais en plus aussi, je me suis rendu compte que souvent, on parlait de l'Ukraine, mais on parlait sur l'Ukraine au lieu de parler avec l'Ukraine. On voyait des tables rondes d'experts qui parlaient sur ce qui se passait en Ukraine dans les médias. Et pour moi, c'était quelque chose que je voulais avoir. Je voulais avoir l'Ukraine qui raconte l'histoire.
Il y a une séquence qui est très belle et qui est très forte dans votre film, qui est celle où on découvre l'équipe de sitting volleyball ukrainienne face à l'équipe russe. C'est un moment qui a une portée symbolique importante. Est-ce que vous pouvez nous raconter peut-être les enjeux de ce tournage-là, sur le vif de ce moment précis?
Es gibt eine Sequenz im Film, die doch sehr stark ist, und zwar trifft das ukrainische Sitzvolleyballteam auf das russische Team. Eine Situation, die doch symbolisch eine große und eine starke Tragweite hat. Vielleicht kannst du etwas dazu sagen, auch zu den Herausforderungen direkt da vor Ort zum Dreh?
Also ich weiß, dass Angelika, das ist eine von Protagonisten, sie ist Kapitän vom Team. Sie hat versucht, sich selber und auch die Mädchen, also die Frauen, wie so einzustellen, dass man muss emotional sich distanzieren, weil das stört ein gutes Spiel machen. Weil wenn die Emotionen da sind, dann man macht schlechtere Leistung. Und sie haben das versucht zu machen, obwohl natürlich es war sehr emotional. Also es war sehr, ich kann auch an mir sagen, ich habe die Kamera gemacht und ich könnte mich kaum an Kamera oder an die Bilder fokussieren, weil ich war so mitgerissen und mitgefiebert. Und das war auch ein schwieriges Spiel. Also sie haben beinahe verloren und dann doch nur mit 2 Punkten gewonnen. Also es war sehr aufgeladene Stimmung, die wahrscheinlich in der Realität viel mehr spürbarer ist als in Bildern. Was also meiner Meinung nach. Ja.
Angelika, la capitaine de l'équipe, elle voulait un peu préparer aussi l'équipe, les joueuses, d'avoir un certain recul, parce que les émotions font que finalement sur le terrain on joue moins bien. Mais donc elle voulait vraiment essayer de jouer sans les émotions, mais c'était très dur. Moi aussi je l'ai ressenti, je faisais la caméra à ce moment-là, et pour moi c'était très difficile de pouvoir suivre ce qui se passait parce que je subissais un peu le jeu. La partie elle était très serrée, elle était très émotionnelle. Finalement l'Ukraine elle a gagné le match que par 2 points. Et c'était une tension, une ambiance très, très chargée et que je crois qu'on ressent encore beaucoup plus fortement en réalité que dans les images.
J'ai eu le plaisir de regarder votre carte blanche récemment, donc ce film qui accompagne online votre travail. Et j'ai découvert que par exemple votre nom en ukrainien signifie frontière, les frontières qui sont au cœur de votre travail. Et on découvre aussi un petit peu votre parcours, vos origines. Est-ce que vous voulez dire un mot justement sur ce parcours et sur ce qui anime en fait votre cinéma, donc ces frontières? Voilà.
Ich habe auch das Glück gehabt, die Carte Blanche sehen zu dürfen. Ein Online-Beitrag eigentlich zu deiner Arbeit. Und da wird gesagt, dass dein Name auf Ukrainisch auch Grenze bedeutet. Und welche Rolle spielen Grenzen in deiner Arbeit? Vielleicht kannst du uns etwas zu deinem Werdegang sagen, zu deiner Herkunft und wie das zusammenhängt.
Also, mein Nachname Cordonez, es ist nur ein Teil von diesem, der Wurzelstamm. Cordon heißt die Grenze. Ist wirklich so und das ist wahrscheinlich ein Zufall. Ich bin aufgewachsen an der Grenze mit Schengen, also zu Ungarn. Und das ist eine Region, die ziemlich abgelegen ist, also weit weg vom Hauptstadt, eine Provinz kann man sagen. Und diese Region hat eine sehr reiche Geschichte. Also es hat in den letzten 100 Jahren 4 oder 5 Länder, Staaten gewechselt. Also es hat einmal Tschechoslowakei gehört, dann der K&K-Monarchie, dann den Ungarn und dann sowjetischen Ukraine und dann wurde kapitalistische Ukraine. Also meine Oma war Bürgerin von, Urgroßoma, Entschuldigung, war Bürgerin von 5 Ländern, ohne dass sie aus ihrem Dorf heraus ziehen musste sozusagen. Und das fand ich immer als eine spannende Tatsache, historische Tatsache, aber inwieweit das jetzt auf meinen Werdegang Einfluss hatte, das kann ich nicht sagen. Ne?
Ouais, effectivement, il y a la racine, donc la première partie de mon nom, cordon, qui veut dire frontière en ukrainien, c'est un hasard. Mais moi, j'ai grandi à la frontière, mais à la frontière Schengen, donc vers l'Hongrie. C'est une région, une province, on pourrait dire aussi, qui est écartée, qui est loin de la capitale. Et c'est une région qui est très riche en histoire. Elle a, dans le dernier siècle, 5 fois changé d'État. Donc c'était la République tchèque, l'Hongrie, l'Union soviétique et finalement l'Ukraine capitaliste. Et juste pour nommer un exemple, mon arrière-grand-mère, elle a été citoyenne de 5 États sans changer d'endroit, donc dans son village. Pour moi, c'était toujours un fait historique qui m'a fasciné, mais je ne saurais pas dire à quel point ça a marqué ma carrière ou mon œuvre.
Merci. Et un mot sur l'utilisation des archives, que c'est plutôt des archives venant des médias. Ce n'est pas toujours facile de trouver un équilibre entre voilà, les images que vous tournez, que les réalisateurs et réalisatrices tournent, et puis les archives qu'on peut y ajouter. Pour vous, c'était important, j'imagine, d'avoir voilà, ces images d'actualité dans votre film.
Ja, vielleicht eine Frage auch zu Arbeit mit Archivbildern aus den Medien. Es ist ja immer schwierig, auch ein Gleichgewicht zu finden zwischen den Bildern, die man selbst dreht, und Archivbildern. Ich glaube aber, es war doch auch wichtig für dich, da diese Bilder aus der Aktualität mit einzugliedern. Vielleicht kannst du uns da etwas dazu sagen, zu deiner Vorgehensweise?
Archivbilder, ich glaube, ich habe relativ nicht so viele Archivbilder im Film. Ich habe das die vom News, also quasi, wo 3 oder 4 Mal im Film gibt es so kurze Situationen, wo ein Militärmensch kommt und sagt die Statistik, was jetzt passiert, und das habe ich gebraucht, um den Hintergrund immer wieder zu verdeutlichen, in welcher Situation die Athleten agieren. Ich glaube, noch Archivbilder haben wir benutzt. Das ist die Szene mit Pressekonferenz auf der Krim mit Putin, wo er dann über die Statement über die Basis sagt. Und das ist natürlich eine sehr wichtige Szene, auch um seine Haltung zu zeigen. Ich will vielleicht nicht zu viel verraten, damit die Zuschauer das selber die Möglichkeit haben, das zu entdecken.
Je n'ai pas utilisé tant d'images d'archives, mais oui, il y a des images des nouvelles du journal télévisé. Il y a 3 à 4 séquences aussi, par exemple, où on voit une marche militaire commentée. Et moi, j'ai utilisé ces images pour illustrer le contexte dans lequel les athlètes aussi, ils devaient agir, ils devaient travailler. J'ai utilisé les images d'archives de la conférence de presse sur la Crimée de Poutine, où il fait sa déclaration sur la base d'entraînement, mais peut-être je ne vais pas tout dévoiler pour le public qui va encore regarder le film.
Et merci beaucoup Lésia. Votre film est un film plein de courage. Vos protagonistes ont beaucoup de courage et vous-même, vous en avez beaucoup pour avoir fait ce film-là. Donc j'invite les personnes qui ont suivi cette discussion à voir le film, si ce n'est pas déjà fait. Et voilà, je vous invite aussi à suivre les prochaines discussions et à tout bientôt.
Danke euch, danke für Ihre Arbeit auch.
Welcome everybody to the 52nd edition of Vision Durel International Film Festival. We are live from Nihon, Switzerland. I would like to give a great welcome to Sebastian Metz, director of The Great Void, that is presented here in world premiere. Welcome, Sebastian.
Thanks for having me here.
Thanks a lot for sharing the film with us. We just came out from a real screening with real people. I would like to ask you in which context and how this film was born.
Well, it started in 2017 when I was granted a fellowship called Villa Aurora in Los Angeles. So I stayed like 3 months in Los Angeles. And the nice thing about this fellowship is you can work completely free on a project that you like to do. And for me, it was clear that, okay, when I spend 3 months in Los Angeles, somehow the city will influence my ideas and also the way how I work. So what I did actually, I started to try to discover the city, which is very difficult in Los Angeles because you actually need to have a car. It's impossible to get around without having a car. So at some point I was like taking my bicycle, driving through the city, trying to get something that would inspire me. And then I almost had an accident with a car on the highway because they are not used to see a bicycle on the highway. So I was so depressed and like also sad about like not being able to discover the city that I had this idea, okay, I want this city to be empty. Like I really had this idea to create a city that is empty, where no human beings are present anymore. So this was my idea, to create shots that I would film like in the middle of the day at noon or at rush hour from this huge highway intersection in Los Angeles, and then I removed everything that is connected with human presence out of the image. And the first results that I saw from that work, they triggered so many things in me, they raised so many questions that I thought, okay, this can be something very interesting. And of course, that was in 2017. I could have never imagined that like 3 years later, more or less, I would face reality with abandoned cities, or cities that look like they are abandoned because people have to stay home. So that was a starting point in 2017, and then it was a long journey for 4 years to make this film.
So you literally erased the human presence from the images yourself?
I made them disappear. I would not call it erase, but I made them disappear, yes.
And we have memories, and we have memories of the human presence mainly through images that remind us television, or that in a way it's especially for the part in Los Angeles, they also remind us of an America that has been presented to us, a European, from television, and how those elements were inserted in the film.
Yes, I would say it's a kind of trace. There's many traces in the film that link to the way how we lived, that show us how we lived and how human beings lived. But this special thing that you mentioned about the VHS, my approach to film, my first approaches to film were via television, not in the cinema. Like when I was a boy, I was able to record VHS in the night and during the day, and record all kind of stuff that I would watch the next day after I come home from school. So basically, I discovered all kind of things that were like broadcasted in the night, mostly private television, which in Germany is really like, it's a shitty program. So they were showing like these kind of B-C movies, trash movies, like this one guy with big muscles saving the world from the enemy, and the enemy is, in most of the cases, Russia, and the good guy is from US. So, so this is why I make the reference in the movie, because this is how I got my first images of what films are, and like good and evil. And my way of producing an image of America was through these VHS recordings And through these films that were mostly from the 80s and 90s, because I was born 82, so this was like the time these movies appear and how they got to me.
I was thinking that there is a very, I mean, the contrast between those images and what you were shooting and what you were also taking out of the images. It's like we have the impression that it's like building a narrative in which the men consume, and we're running so fast, and at a certain point totally disappeared. It reminds science fiction movies, and there is also a very beautiful images in the film in which from a total dark, a city comes up from lights, a city, and it's a moment that I really loved in the film because it reminds.
Don't spoil too much.
Huh?
Don't spoil too much.
I didn't spoil much, but I really think that this is an important moment that reminds me also a lot of classical from science fiction. So I wanted to know how those. Your knowledge of this genre or this genre influenced you in the making of the film?
I wouldn't say that it influenced me in a very specific way, but of course, like showing an abandoned world, like ghost towns, big cities that are empty of all life, of all human presence, they always have this connotation with science fiction, this kind of dystopia connotation, but it was nothing that especially influenced me. Like this sequence that you were talking about, it was like many things in the film, a very intuitive idea that I had, and then I followed it. So as I was doing everything by myself, I could just say, okay, what if at some point in the film there will be a moment that irritates us because things started to appear again and the electricity starts to power up again. And then I can just follow this idea because I do everything by myself, so I know how to make something happen like this sequence. And then I thought, yes, that's something that is really essential at this point of the film, that the silence and this kind of empty journey is broken by something that irritates us because we think something starts again to find out it doesn't start again.
The images are inhabited by a very subtle and complex sound work. Can you tell us how you work on this aspect?
Yeah, sound is very important for me. I might have a special approach to sound because I don't hear very well. So I used to enhance sounds in an unnatural way, that they become almost a little bit over-dominant. And in this case, with this project, I decided to collaborate with Genuel von Lilienstern. He's a sound artist and composer. And he was also with me in Los Angeles at the same time in the same artistic residency. So I asked him if he would like to join and bring in his ideas of how to make the sound design. And the biggest challenge was to tell silence, because in the image it's kind of easy. Okay, there's no one anymore, but in the sound you also need to describe silence, which is not easy, because I did a lot of sound recordings on site, not in the cities but also outside of the cities, and you would always hear the presence of human beings somewhere. Like it could be an airplane far away, it could be a car that you don't hear in the first moment but it's there, or a train, or steps, or anything that comes up in the sound recording. And this was the most difficult part, to tell silence. And Genuel and I, we decided that to create silence on the sound layer, you need to break the silence from time to time so that the silence is even more present. And so this is why the film has many different dynamics between the very silent parts and the very loud parts. And sometimes you would hear a sound that you don't know if it is a technical problem of the screening copy in the cinema, like some kind of crackling, or if it was something in the sound recording, or if something is there that we just cannot see, but it makes a sound.
I would like to remind that it's possible to make questions in this very moment. and I have this fantastic tool in which I can check if there will be any questions. Without spoiling, because we're not going to spoil. But there is a moment that it's like a pillar of the film, and is in which a voice from an old recording is raising. I would like you, maybe if you can talk about this voice, and also the choice of hearing it from the author of the text.
Mm-hmm. Well, this voice is from Bertolt Brecht. So I knew his poem from before, but I stumbled over it last year again. And it had a very powerful connection for me to the film. Because when he wrote it and when he published it in '39, it was just a few weeks before the Second World War started. And actually he's reaching out to warn us about what is going to happen, and also to address to those who will come after. So that's why his poem is called An die Nachgeborenen, to those who follow us. And the idea is very much connected to the film that, okay, human beings have disappeared, so what comes next, what comes after? And somehow this is like the traces you can see in the film. They show the ones who come after how we lived. They all link to the way how we lived. And I liked very much the poem from Brecht, because he's really like addressing us, and he is like challenging us, if we are not able to change it, at least to those who come after us, to make it better. And this is something that I find very optimistic in a way, but also like it's sad, because he's starting with saying, we truly live in dark times.
Yeah, and he talks about being indulgent, no?
Mm-hmm.
With them. I think that the film creates, it's in a very delicate balance between moment in which we're really living in dark times, in which there is, you can feel a sort of pessimism, and there are other moments in which there is a sort of brightness in the images and in the landscape, and also in the presence of animals or life, after all, despite the one that suddenly disappeared. Was this like balance something you researched, or is something that was not in your mind as you first started?
Well, all places in the film, they have a connection to me. They are not just random. Like I told you, LA in the beginning was just because I was there, so this is like the starting point. But then I also wanted to play with the expectation of the viewer that at some point maybe something new will start again, something like we would press a reset button. At some point of the film you feel like, okay, now like it's over, everything is like gone, and the nature shows itself like almost like in a paradise, like everything is like green and animals appear. But then after a while again the streets appears, like the scars, how I would call it, the scars that human beings created while they were living on Earth. They appear again, and they show us, no, it's not a fresh start, it's the same planet that we are on, it's the same journey that we are still following. And so this was something that I was very conscious about, that I'm breaking the expectation from time to time. Even in the end, I mean, not to spoil too much, but the end is also kind of dark, because I think this optimism that we could create out of this, it's not the film's responsibility to create optimism. We have to do it for ourselves.
So the choice of finishing the film in a place that is very close to you, it's completely intentional.
Yeah, I mean, the last location in the film is maybe the most personal location in the whole film, because it's the empty flat from my grandmother after she died. And this footage I filmed even before Los Angeles.
Okay.
So this is also maybe a kind of work flow or kind of working that I love to collect footage. I always have a camera with me in general, not here in Nyon, but in general when I'm around I have my camera with me and I film. And in that time when my grandmother died, she lived in that flat for more than 60 years, so it was like a museum in a way. And then we had to move out all the stuff, and then the flat was empty, completely empty, and you could still see the things that are left behind, like an image that was on the wall. After you remove it, like after 40 years, you would see the lines, the scars. And I filmed it because I wanted to, but I could have never imagined that time that this would link to a film that I make a few years later. So this is how the footage came into the movie.
I want to read you, someone is writing on the internet, such an original narrative and stunning capital images.
Thanks.
It's a remark, and I'm glad to read it. You were talking at the beginning of your residencies, and you were talking about the possibility to work freely, to work completely free. What do you mean by that? What are these? What do you mean by freedom in relationship to the film, as we say today?
Freedom means to me to do what I want and how I want it, to be able to following an idea that maybe is not, it's still not like a complete idea, like not an idea that I would ask for funding or producers to say, hey, this will be the plot. And no, sometimes I just have a glimpse of an idea that interests me and that I want to follow and see where it goes to. And maybe I don't know where it will end, but this means freedom to me, to work as an artist in a way that I can just follow my intuition and my creativity. And of course it's not easy in a way of that if you don't have funding, if you work completely by yourself, then you work a lot for free, let's say, to be able not to be able to make a living, etc. But this is more important to me, to be free and to follow the things that interest me without knowing what the outcome will be. So this means freedom to me. But in this case, for the first time, I really decided to collaborate with people. They all came into a very late state of the film, and it was such a beautiful experience because I know all the people that works with me together, and so the freedom until the end was still there.
Okay. And there is a moment in the film, like almost in the half of it, in which we enter what you were calling before when we were in a cinema, a tunnel. And this tunnel, it's like a little bit like an Armageddon in a way, no? It sounds like a door to another dimension, and it's a very specific work on iconography. Where does this come from?
I have no idea, to be honest. I wanted to create something that lands like a spaceship, to talk about the science fiction again, but no, that really lands in the middle of the film like a spaceship that comes out from nowhere. And I had this idea with a transition with this like fan, because again it comes out of the sequence where like you feel like something starts again, electricity starts to power up, and then there's this fan and it gets more and more crazy. And then I knew that I wanted to create something that is out of imagination, like that is something different that we cannot really catch. And so I decided to, almost like a mosaic, to put like hundreds of images into one big composition that I call the endless tunnel, because it's a kind of infinity into another space, maybe. Maybe not that I was unconsciously thinking about this while I was doing it, but like the tunnel in 2001 in the end. Like this is also something that suddenly pulls you somewhere else. And it should be something that is so much overwhelming that you cannot even catch it. anymore. For that, you see all these kind of little images, but you just focus on the big nothing.
Yeah, that's why I was saying it's like something, it really reminds of something hellish in a way, in which you're, I won't say much because I don't want to spoil. Well, thank you very much, Sebastian, for this chat.
Thank you for having me here.
I would like to remind our audience that the film is available online for 72 hours and that our little talk will be available as well. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome everybody to that 52nd edition of Vision du Réel. I would like to welcome to discuss with me right now Philippe Cartelli, who is with me, he's a filmmaker of Slow Return that we selected in our international competition Burning Light. Slow Return that you could watch online from today and for 72 hours. Back to your work, Philippe, that we are very welcome to have the possibility to screen it here in Lyon. I would like to ask you, first of all, why such a title, Slow Return? Because you are American, you live in New York, then you change of base to settle temporarily in Marseille. What was the purpose of that choice, just to travel up around or along that river called the Rhône, that all the audience here knows very well, because it works through Geneva and in the mountains.
Yes, thank you for the good question, good opening question. So when I lived in Marseille, it was actually not to make this film. I was there for another reason. But I started traveling outside of the city, and I would frequently go to the Camargue, and I visited the town that half of the film is shot at, Salins-de-Giraud, which is the first town across the Rhône if you're coming from Marseille. So I didn't go very far. I just crossed the river and stopped there. And at first I was interested in maybe making a portrait of this place. And then I had the idea of thinking more about the river, because I had to cross the river. To get there, you have to take a ferry to cross the river, so it's kind of a process. And then I began learning more about the river, and I learned that the source of the river was here in Switzerland, that the source of the river was a glacier that was melting, and it occurred to me that it would be interesting to visit the glacier to see what it was like here. And at that point, I was thinking maybe I would make a film about the whole river. And then what I found when I came to the glacier was interesting enough to me that I felt that I had maybe enough between these two places to make the film. So maybe I could talk more about that later. But the kind of the theme for me was inspired by an interest in the Anthropocene, what people call the Anthropocene, or related phenomena like climate change, global warming.
How do you define the Anthropocene?
How do I define it? The age of man is, or humans, of human impact on the environment. But I think for me, actually, so this is, a good question, because I think for me, the notion of the Anthropocene covers all these different kinds of phenomena and experiences. And I think one thing I was interested in doing is looking at the way that something we can maybe call an ecological consciousness is different when people are looking at it from a larger scale, like the scale of the entire world or the scale of a region. And it's very different when it's lived in and experienced in a kind of single location. That processes are more subtle, they're more incremental, they're slower. And so this is one thing that I was interested in doing, is looking at places that were impacted in some way by this Anthropocene or by climate change, but where change was occurring in a kind of slow pace, but where you could kind of understand the way things were in the past and the way they are now, and project towards the future in some way.
When you decided to begin that slow return in Salins-de-Giraud, so it's very near Les Saintes-Maries-de-la-Mer, in the Camargue. How do you meet your characters? Because we have the impression that you, through that slow return, you engage somehow an impressionistic aesthetics, capturing moments, pieces of conversations between characters. You never define where they come from. Yeah, we can guess that they are there are fishermen and somebody like that. But how did you present yourself as an American filmmaker, coming with a camera, with those people who are just living and using the river? And in a way, you were also using the river as a filmmaker, or trying to depict the relationships between those people and a landscape.
Right. Well, first of all, I do speak French, and I've just asked to speak in English today, so it's easier for me to express myself more fluently. But so when I met people there, I don't know if people necessarily thought right away that I was American, but maybe there's a kind of interest also for people to, if I'm interested in meeting someone from someone else, then they can be interested in meeting me and learning something about me. And I think my interest in the location, though, is it wasn't as though I showed up there and I said, okay, hi, I'm making a film about climate change. Would you like to be in my film? Can I film you doing something?
That was my question.
Right, I did not say that because I didn't know that, like, exactly what the kind of the articulation was going to be. I was interested in the landscape. I was attracted by the landscape, which is very beautiful, but also sometimes seems to be almost untouched by human presence, and then has all of these signs of human presence through industry and yeah.
Had you unconsciously, when you were filming that landscape, did you have the unconsciously ghost of the big American photography of the beginning of the 20th century, like Adams or somebody like that? Or no, not at all?
I don't know. Maybe not so much, although it's an interesting thing because when I was the first time I came to the Camargue, I had this sense that I was in a place that I had been to before, and I think I was thinking about the Mississippi Delta, which is an area where I'd lived not for a very long time, but for a short amount of time. But there was some kind of connection that I felt to that place. And then as I spent time talking to people, I learned that obviously, environmental conditions in one location were similar to the ones in the other place. In terms of form, I don't think I was thinking so much about any kind of like U.S. or American tradition. I think I was
your
more.
approach was more extensive.
Yeah, but it was more. I was maybe more inspired by landscape films, in general, and then there's also the association of the Camargue as like a place that's similar to the United States is something that people in France talk about, right? Like le Far West or something, that it's like the French version of the West, the desert or something like that. Yeah.
So you spend a lot of time in that small place, because it seems to be a small place, but using your frame, you make it bigger. We have the impression as a spectator that you are trying to make it bigger, and to make it bigger because it's about to collapse. There is a threat. We can hear a guy in a touring boat for tourists, who says, in a few years, the Sainte-Marie-de-la-Mer would become an island.
Yeah.
So did you have the purpose to record something that was not about right now, but in a few years, something that definitively changed in the landscape and also affected the people that you met?
Yeah, this is another good question, but I think it kind of links back to what I was saying earlier about things that are impending. So people know in both locations that things are changing. They see things changing on a smaller scale, visually, like physically, and then there are all these pronouncements that scientists say that this will happen, right? But then if you live in a place, you don't necessarily see these things happening day to day. So it's similar to at the other end of the river where the glacier is melting. Everyone knows that the glacier is melting. The water is streaming off of it into a lake, and you can tell that it's physically getting smaller. And people were covering up parts of it to prevent it from melting faster. But it's still a process. It still takes place over time. It's still slow. This is the process. And
it will affect also that area because the level of the water will rise.
Yeah. But this is, I think, what I was trying to do is show the way that there's this one temporality, which is the way we describe things, or the way that that scientists or also maybe activists kind of use to describe a situation of an emergency. an environmental emergency. And comparatively to other places in the world, neither of these locations are experiencing, I think, an emergency in the same way as other places. But so that's why I thought it was interesting to look at them over more of a kind of longer duration, as this process that's happening is certainly happening, and it appears to be inevitable. But the way that people interact with that is more incremental. It's slow. It's adaptive, right? So people can fish. They still fish, but then sometimes you can't eat the fish because it's not good, or you need to know which fish you should eat and which fish you shouldn't eat. The fish that's been in the river longer is bad.
There is that guy who's okay. I would like. I want.
Only one kind.
I don't want to eat that type of fish.
Right.
I think it is sambre. I don't know how to spell it in English.
Zander, I think it's called.
Yeah. But the lure, it's okay.
Yeah.
So you are always capturing very small moments. I would say. Maybe popular wisdom, not engaging any scientific discourses on what you depicted. It was your goal when you started, or you imagine one moment to interview, I don't know, specialists of that area, and people who were just recording all the changes on a larger scale, and on a larger scale also of time.
Mm-hmm. I talked to some people, maybe more in the Camargue, about what was happening there, and then anyone can read about what's happening to the Rhone Glacier or the situation in Switzerland in glaciers more generally. But no, I didn't want to have an expert opinion, and I'm trying to avoid that in the film. Also, I think to allow people to see how people express themselves in relation to these things. But there also is a disconnect, and there are moments where what I'm saying about this ecological consciousness, that people talk about things in one way. It's a very everyday thing. Not everyone talks about the environment all the time. But then when I'm there, I want to talk about it.
They would become crazy.
Well, no, maybe, yeah. But because I'm there, I want them to talk about it. And so there's this one moment where I'm in the car with someone, and I say, in the film, and I say, can you talk about this? And he says, okay, but no one's going to think I'm a scientist in your film, because there's this notion that if you're speaking about facts or about these kinds of phenomena, that then you have to be some kind of expert to use this kind of knowledge. So right, yeah, my interest is more in the way that people kind of express this knowledge that they have themselves in a more natural way, and then that's more challenging for me, because I have to kind of then create the connections myself that I want the audience to leave with, and there's a lot of ambiguity there as well, I think, in that sense, because I don't always know exactly what I want the audience to think. I want them to kind of understand the subtleties of the situation as well. Yeah.
In the narration, you give to the spectator I would say a false track, because there is that map and the tracé of the river till the source, the glacier. So we expect that we will go with you, travel up with you along that river. And there is a big ellipse because we stay a lot in that small village where we are capturing people, the users of the river, and in which way they will be affected by what is going on on the upper side. And you have that, you use a picture, you create a picture which is connected with our imaginary about climate change. I would say in French it's called a crystal, an image crystal picture, but it's more psychoanalyst image. With that ice which is slowly drifting and guiding us where you are putting us just afterwards. So why did not you decide to travel up and maybe try finding another places where to shoot, where to watch and to share with us different ways of living the river on the upper side. You are just staying on one point before
Or 2
sea,
points.
just 2
Yeah,
points,
yeah,
yeah, the sea,
Right.
and just of that, the big part of the film is located in that place in Switzerland called Obergams, I think, where is the source of the river.
Yeah.
So why
Yeah.
did you choose that ellipse?
Yeah. So at one point, I was thinking that I would go down the river or up the river, and that would be part of the film. And then I realized that there was enough kind of to talk about in each location, and I wanted to allow different people from different places. I wanted these stories to be kind of told and to accompany one another. But then there's also this other idea to focus on the extremities, to focus on the peripheries, to not focus on the center, to not focus on the lake here or Geneva or Lyon or these more kind of maybe famous places that are associated with the Rhône, which is I don't think ever a very famous river, regardless. It's not, it doesn't have that reputation, but maybe for wine in, other countries.
Of course.
But to kind of connect these two places that were very far away, like this was kind of a challenge for me also to say, these are the furthest points that are on this body of water that's also a natural resource that they share. And so they're very dissimilar from each other, that some people live in the mountains and they speak German, and the other people live by the Mediterranean Sea and they have beaches and they speak French, and most of them are descended from
So
Italian
the river
and
is
Greek
also a link.
people. Sorry?
So the river is also a link.
So the river is a link, but that it was to kind of test that link and to see where these similarities, where these comparisons can emerge. And so that was the kind of the challenge of the film for me is to find those connections, to find those similarities, to find those complementarities, and then also to create them sometimes too, like the scene you just described, to add things in of my own, to make sure that those things would be concrete in some way.
But you made also a connection between those two spaces that are very far from one from each from the other. It's with the dream of one of your character that connect us again with the. I would say it's almost a picture of a cycle because she's dreaming, and then we can go back to the very beginning of the movie and just swimming in the very deep river and then going on to the surface at night and then go again.
Yeah.
And it was for you a way of representing the fact that as humans we are engaged in the cycle of life and the landscape and something that is bigger than us, but we have to take care. Even if we are just lying on a bed in a very beautiful scenery and just thinking about it.
This is a very beautiful interpretation. I like that. I like it very much. I think, there are elements that I share with what you in terms of my thinking of the film that I share with what you just said as well. For me, there's also this sense of the river being, like we think about bodies of water as being connected, right? Next to the lake here, you assume that people who live around the lake have some kind of cultural similarity, but the Mediterranean is a huge body of water, and we still assume that people have a cultural similarity, right? But the river is much smaller than the Mediterranean, but we don't assume that people would have a similarity, and yet they do. There are these kinds of complementary processes and experiences that people have in relation to the environment, to their connection to the environment, to one another, and that's important for me also, I think, in relation to this question of climate change and the Anthropocene, to remind also of these connections that we have to different places. And so the river, we know, flows in one direction, but in the film, to an extent, I'm trying to kind of reverse the flow, to flow backwards, and then what you see at the end of the film is maybe a return, another return to the other end, so like a cycle, like you were saying. And I think that, I like that as well.
And you also mix some archive with that excerpt from a famous movie called James Bond, and it's also very enjoyable to see how you mix very different layers people and scenery and the way you are framing all those different landscapes, so that you create what one of my colleagues who wrote the text in the catalog called a sensitive archaeology of a landscape. You agree with that?
Yeah, I do. And I think also with the use of the different imagery, which is sometimes artistic imagery, sometimes it's technical or scientific imagery, and sometimes it's entertainment, like the James Bond film you're talking about, I'm also trying to use images to narrate the story, and also just acknowledge that these images are not just evidence, it's not just objective evidence that proves a fact or proves a point, but that their use in anything, any kind of film, any kind of project, like a documentary, for example, is always kind of performative. So I'm structuring this process, which is kind of my own process of revealing the use of images in the way that we consider and we understand the environment in these two locations, but more generally too. Yeah.
Okay, time is running.
Okay.
Thank you very much again, Philippe, for sharing with us and with the audience that slow return to somehow our origins. I would like to remind the spectators that Slow Return is still available for 72 hours online on the site of Vision du Réel. Good night. See you soon.